The moment Silas Carmichael told that homeless woman she was ruining his reputation, he had no idea he was speaking to the only person who'd ever truly known him. November winds sliced through downtown Chicago like a knife through silk, sending newspapers tumbling down Michigan Avenue in chaotic spirals. Silas stepped out of his black executive sedan, adjusting the cuffs of his $1,500 Tom Ford suit, his eyes lifting to admire the gleaming monument to his success, Carmichael Technologies Tower. 34 years old, billionaire at 32. His software had revolutionized data security and made him a fortune that most people couldn't fathom in 3 lifetimes. Forbes loved him. Fortune celebrated him. The world knew his name. But nobody, not a single soul in his carefully curated circle, truly knew Silas Carmichael. He'd made sure of that, because knowing someone meant showing them where you came from, and Silas had spent the last 2 decades burying that part of his story so deep that even he rarely acknowledged its existence. He approached his building's entrance with the confident stride of a man who owned everything his shadow touched. That's when he saw her. A black woman huddled against his building's exterior wall, wrapped in a threadbare coat that looked like it had survived one too many winters. Her hair, matted but still showing traces of once careful maintenance, framed a face weathered by circumstances he didn't care to imagine. In her trembling hands, she held a cardboard sign with shaky handwriting that read, "Anything helps. God bless." Silas's jaw clenched tight. This wasn't the image Carmichael Technologies projected to the world. Excellence, innovation, success, not poverty, not desperation, not this. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't stay here. This is private property." The woman looked up slowly, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something that might have been recognition, or maybe just the hollow resignation of someone who'd heard those words in 1,000 different voices, from 1,000 different men who looked right through her. "I'm just trying to stay warm, sir," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "I'll move along soon." Soon isn't good enough. Silas pulled out his phone, his thumb already hovering over security's number. "I'm calling security. We have standards to maintain here. This building represents excellence. Having people like you out front sends the wrong message to our clients." Watch how she flinched at those words. Watch how she began gathering her possessions. A torn backpack, a plastic bag with what looked like spare clothing, her hands shaking from cold or shame or both. Watch how Silas didn't notice, didn't care. "Please," she whispered, "just 5 more minutes. The shelter doesn't open until—" "That's not my problem." He cut her off without even looking at her face. "Figure it out somewhere else." Security emerged from the building like well-trained guard dogs responding to their master's whistle. Silas gestured toward the woman with a dismissive nod, then strode into his glass fortress without a backward glance, his mind already racing ahead to his 9 o'clock meeting, to quarterly projections, to deals worth millions. He didn't see her pause at the corner, didn't see the tears streaming down her face, didn't hear her whisper a single syllable that once meant everything to her. "See." That evening, Silas sat in his penthouse office, 47 floors above the city that sparkled below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. This was his sanctuary, the quiet hours after everyone else had gone home, when he could focus without the noise of other people's needs and expectations. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. His mother, Eleanor Carmichael, calling from Connecticut. "See, darling, I'm going through old boxes for the estate sale." Her voice carried that particular warmth only mothers seem to possess. "I found something I thought you'd want to see. Photographs from when we lived in Englewood." Silas's fingers froze on his keyboard. Englewood. That name was a ghost he'd spent years exorcising from his personal history. 2 years on Chicago's South Side when his father's first business venture had crashed and burned spectacularly. 2 years of being poor, really genuinely poor, living in a cramped apartment while his father clawed his way back to respectability. The Carmichaels didn't talk about Englewood. They'd erased it from the family narrative like an embarrassing chapter from an otherwise pristine book. "Mom, I'm busy. There's a picture of you and that little girl you used to play with." What was her name? His mother paused, searching her memory. Alicia? No, Aaliyah. Aaliyah Monroe. You two were absolutely inseparable. The name hit him like a physical blow. Aaliyah. Suddenly, Silas wasn't in his penthouse anymore. He was 8 years old, sitting on concrete steps, holding hands with a girl who had the brightest smile he'd ever seen in dreams bigger than the cramped world they inhabited. Aaliyah Monroe, who defended him when other kids mocked the white boy who couldn't play basketball. Aaliyah, who'd shared her grandmother's sweet potato pie and taught him to double dutch and dreamed out loud about becoming a teacher who'd change the world. I'm going to help kids like us dream bigger, she'd said, her eyes full of absolute certainty. I'm going to build something amazing, he'd promised. And when I do, we'll still be friends. Always. They'd sealed it with their pinky fingers intertwined. The most sacred promise 8-year-olds can make. Then his father's new venture had succeeded, and the Carmichaels had vanished from Englewood overnight. New house, new school, new friends, new life. Silas had promised to write, promised to visit, but promises fade like morning mist when new opportunities shine bright enough. The letters stopped. The calls ended. Aaliyah Monroe became just another memory, packed away with everything else from those years he'd rather forget. Silas ended the call with his mother, but he couldn't shake the feeling crawling beneath his skin. Something about that homeless woman outside his building. Something about her eyes. The next morning, against every rational instinct, he called his security chief. The woman who was outside yesterday, did you see where she went? We moved her along like you requested, sir. Directed her to the mission over on State Street. 20 minutes later, Silas found himself walking into the State Street shelter, feeling like an alien who'd landed on the wrong planet. The smell of industrial cleaning solution mixed with too many people in too little space. Fluorescent lights that hummed with institutional indifference. He approached the intake desk, suddenly aware of how ridiculous his $1,000 coat must look. I'm looking for a woman who might have come here yesterday. About 5'6", black, natural hair. The intake worker raised a skeptical eyebrow. That describes 40% of the women here, sir. Got a name? He didn't. He realized with uncomfortable clarity that he'd never even asked. He'd dismissed her like trash without learning the most basic thing about her, her name. He turned to leave, but as he passed the common area, he saw her, sitting at a long table, helping a young girl with homework, wearing that same patient expression he remembered from childhood. Their eyes met. Hers widened with recognition, hurt, anger, and beneath it all, a flicker of the girl who'd once believed in pinky promises. See, his world tilted on its axis. Aaliyah, here's the question that should haunt us all. How many people have we walked past, dismissed or ignored, never realizing they were once the most important person in our world? They sat in his car in the shelter's parking lot because Aaliyah refused to go anywhere else with him. And honestly, could you blame her? Her arms were crossed defensively across her chest, her body angled toward the passenger door like she might bolt at any second. The leather seats of his Mercedes probably cost more than she'd seen in 6 months, and the irony of that wasn't lost on either of them. Outside, the gray Chicago afternoon pressed against the windows like an unwelcome witness to a conversation 26 years overdue. Silas's hands gripped the steering wheel even though the engine was off, his knuckles white with the tension of everything he wanted to say and didn't know how to begin. How? The word came out strangled, inadequate. What happened to you? Aaliyah's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. You mean how did the girl who was going to change the world end up begging outside your billion-dollar tower? That's what you really want to know, isn't it? See? I didn't mean. Yes, you did. She turned to face him fully, and he could see the beautiful woman she'd become beneath the layers of exhaustion and hardship that had tried to bury her. You want the story so you can feel better about treating me like I was trash yesterday. So you can tell yourself it wasn't really your fault because you didn't know. So you can sleep at night. The words landed like physical blows because they were absolutely, devastatingly true. Silas wanted absolution more than understanding. He wanted her to explain away his cruelty with circumstances beyond his control. He wanted to be the hero of this story when he'd already proven himself the villain. But here's what you need to understand about Aaliyah Monroe. She'd lost everything except her ability to see through people's comfortable lies. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every dream that had died slowly, painfully, one impossible choice at a time. I did become a teacher, just like I said I would. Got my degree from Chicago State. Taught third grade at Bronzeville Elementary for 6 years. Her eyes grew distant, looking at a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I was good at it too, really good. My kids loved me. Their parents trusted me. I was making a difference, see. Small maybe, but real. Silas waited, afraid that if he spoke, she'd stop talking. Afraid of what came next, but needing to hear it anyway. Then Mama got sick. Aaliyah's voice cracked on the word. Cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. You remember my mama? How she used to make that sweet potato pie you loved. How she called you, baby, like you were one of her own. He remembered. God, he remembered. Mrs. Monroe with her warm hugs and warmer smile, who'd never made him feel like the white kid who didn't belong. She didn't have insurance that covered what she needed. The treatments, the medications, the hospital stays. It was like watching money evaporate while watching her die in slow motion. Aaliyah's hands twisted in her lap. I took out loans, second jobs, third jobs, sold everything I owned that had any value. I did everything, see, everything a daughter could possibly do. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of love that hadn't been enough. She died anyway, 2 years ago last March. Aaliyah wiped her eyes roughly, angry at the tears that still came. The medical debt buried me alive. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. I lost my apartment trying to pay it down. Then I lost my job because the school needed an address for direct deposit, for tax forms, for all the bureaucratic nonsense that makes perfect sense until you're the one without an address to give them. And once you're down, see, once you fall through those cracks, the system doesn't have a rope to throw you. It has a boot to keep you there. How do you measure the distance between two people sitting inches apart? How do you calculate the gap between a penthouse and a shelter, between having everything and losing it all, between the child who made promises and the man who forgot them? Silas felt something fundamental crack inside his chest, like the foundation of everything he'd built his life upon had just revealed itself to be sand. Why didn't you reach out to me? I could have. Could have what? Aaliyah's eyes flashed with an anger that had been building for 26 years. Saved me? Rescued the poor homeless woman like some knight in shining armor. She laughed bitterly. You forgot about me when you were 8 years old, see? You got your ticket to the suburbs and never looked back. Why would I think you'd remember me now? Besides, I saw your picture in the Tribune. Silas Carmichael, tech billionaire, dating supermodels, buying buildings, donating to charity galas where they serve champagne that costs more than my mother's medication. We don't live in the same world anymore. Maybe we never did. We used to share the same world, he said quietly. We used to share everything. Yeah, for exactly 2 years. Until your daddy struck gold and you all disappeared like we'd never existed. She paused, and her voice softened slightly. I'm not bitter about that part. Kids grow apart. Families move. That's life. But don't sit here now and pretend you would have cared if you'd known who I was. Yesterday proved exactly how you see people like me. Like we're stains on your perfect picture. Like we're problems to be removed, not people to be seen. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke, and Silas couldn't wave it away because every word was true. Even if it hadn't been Aaliyah, and oh God, the fact that it was Aaliyah made it infinitely worse. His actions had been cruel, dismissive, inhumane. He'd looked at a suffering human being and seen only an inconvenience to his corporate image. When had he become this person? When had success calcified into callousness? When had the boy who'd shared sweet potato pie and pinky promises transformed into a man who called security on the vulnerable? You're right. The words came out quietly, but they felt like the first honest thing he'd said in years. I've become someone I don't recognize. Someone who forgot where he came from. Who forgot that circumstances, not character, separate the penthouse from the shelter. who forgot that we're all just a few bad breaks away from needing the compassion I refuse to give. Aaliyah studied him with those eyes that had always seen too much, that had looked at an awkward white kid in Englewood and decided he was worth defending. For a moment, just a flash, he saw a softness in her expression. A glimpse of the girl who'd believed the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. "What do you want from me, see?" It was the most important question anyone had ever asked him, and he needed to get the answer right. Not for his conscience, not for his reputation, for her, for them, for the promises made by children who'd believed friendship was forever. "A chance," he said carefully, "to help, to make things right. I don't need your charity." The words came fast, protective, proud. "That's not what I'm offering." An idea was forming in his mind, born from equal parts guilt and genuine recognition of talent wasted by circumstance. "I have an education initiative program at my company. We partner with schools in underserved communities across Chicago. We provide technology, funding, teacher training. But you know what we're missing? Someone who actually understands those communities. Someone who's lived the experience, who knows what those kids need because she was one of those kids. Someone with real teaching experience and genuine passion instead of consultants with degrees and no heart." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed with suspicion earned through hard lessons. "You're offering me a job? Just like that?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. But I need to know something first." He turned to face her fully. "Are you still the Aaliyah who used to tutor kids for free at the community center? The one who spent her lunch money on books for the classroom library? The one who believed education could change everything?" The question hung between them, and he watched something shift in her expression. A spark of the girl she'd been flickering to life in the woman she'd become. "I'm still that Aaliyah," she said softly. "Just bruised, battered, but not broken, never broken." And that's how Aaliyah Monroe walked back into Silas Carmichael's life, not as a rescue mission, but as a reckoning. The next 3 months became a masterclass in transformation for both of them. Silas set Aaliyah up in a modest apartment in Pilsen. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe, with heat that worked and neighbors who smiled, and helped her get back on her feet. Not as charity, as an advance on her salary, as an investment in someone who'd never stopped being valuable just because the world had stopped seeing her value. She threw herself into the education initiative with a ferocity that stunned his highly paid consultants, bringing insights and connections they'd never considered because they'd never lived the reality of the communities they claimed to serve. But here's what changed everything. Having Aaliyah back in his life forced Silas to confront the man he'd become in the mirror of the man he'd promised to be. Through her eyes, he saw the walls he'd built to keep people at a distance, the empathy he'd traded for efficiency, the humanity he'd sacrificed on the altar of success. The boy from Englewood he'd buried so deep, he'd almost convinced himself that person had never existed. They started having coffee together before work, 6:30 a.m. at a diner halfway between his penthouse and her apartment. Conversations that started about the education program but wandered into childhood memories, into dreams deferred and rediscovered, into the people they'd wanted to be before life had taught them to want different things. Silas found himself laughing more, listening more, feeling more, remembering that the best part of success was supposed to be having the power to make things better, not just the power to avoid things that were uncomfortable. Watch how she challenged him. Watch how she didn't let him hide behind his billions or his board meetings or his carefully constructed image of the self-made man. Watch how she reminded him, gently but relentlessly, that he hadn't made himself at all, that people like her mother had fed him when his family had nothing, that teachers in underfunded schools had believed in him, that a community he'd left behind had shaped the person he'd become even if he'd spent decades trying to forget. One evening, working late on a presentation to the school board about expanding the program, Aaliyah looked up from her laptop. The office was empty except for them, the city lights below casting long shadows across the conference room. "Can I ask you something?" Silas set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Anything. Why did you really come looking for me that day? At the shelter?" Her voice was careful, like she was afraid of the answer but needed to hear it anyway. He considered lying, considered giving her the sanitized version that made him look better. But Aaliyah had always deserved the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. My mom mentioned your name. It triggered something. Guilt, maybe, or curiosity about what happened to the girl from my childhood. But honestly, he met her eyes. I think some part of me recognized you that first morning. Not consciously. Not in a way I could have articulated. But something inside me knew. And that knowing made me feel things I'd spent years trying not to feel. So I had to find out. Had to know if my instinct was right or if I was just projecting guilt onto a stranger. And now, the question was barely a whisper. What do you feel now? This was the moment. The edge of something that would change everything or ruin what they'd carefully rebuilt. Silas could feel his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape the confession he was about to make. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it again. The words came easier than he'd expected, like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. You remind me of who I wanted to be before I got lost in the game of becoming successful. You make me want to be better, not richer, not more powerful, just better, more human, more real. Aaliyah stood slowly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city spreading out below them like a galaxy of broken promises and second chances. When she spoke, her voice trembled with vulnerability he'd rarely heard from her. I need to be honest with you, see? These last few months, I felt something changing between us, and it scares me. He moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but careful not to touch. Not yet. Not until he understood what she was saying. What scares you? That this isn't just about old friendship anymore. That I'm feeling things I shouldn't feel for my boss. For someone from a different world who could destroy me with a word if he wanted to. She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was equal parts hope and terror. That I'm falling for you, and I don't know if it's real or just gratitude for being rescued. I don't know if I can trust these feelings or if I'm just so grateful to not be sleeping in a shelter that I've confused kindness with something more. Can you imagine carrying that doubt? Can you imagine having your heart pull you toward someone while your mind screams that you can't trust it? That you're just broken and desperate and confusing basic human decency with love? Silas's heart was racing now, his carefully controlled world tilting on an axis he hadn't anticipated. You weren't rescued, Aaliyah. You saved yourself. You just needed someone to open a door that should have never been closed in the first place. And what I feel for you. He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. It isn't about guilt or obligation or trying to fix the past. He took her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm like they were kids again, and touch was the simplest, purest form of connection. I've dated people who looked perfect on paper. Models, executives, society women who knew which fork to use and how to work a room. None of them made me feel like I was home. None of them challenged me to be better instead of just more successful. None of them looked at me and saw the boy I used to be alongside the man I became. None of them were you. See, I'm falling for you too. Maybe I've been falling since I was 8 years old and you shared your lunch with the weird white kid who didn't fit in anywhere. Maybe it took 26 years and the worst moment of my life to realize that the best thing I ever had was the thing I walked away from. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears that caught the city lights like stars. You were never weird. You were just different, special. You saw things differently. You dreamed bigger than the block we lived on. That's what I loved about you. The word hung between them. Loved. Present tense or past. Current or historical. The ambiguity was a tightrope they were both walking. Silas cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that traced a path down her cheek. Is this okay? She nodded, and when their lips met, it felt like every promise they'd made as children, every year of separation, every hardship endured, every moment of loneliness had been leading to this. The kiss was tender and profound, healing wounds neither had fully acknowledged. It was an apology and a promise, an ending and a beginning, a recognition that some connections transcend time and circumstance and every logical reason why they shouldn't work. When they finally pulled apart, Aaliyah was crying and laughing at the same time, her forehead pressed against his. What are we doing? She whispered. Something terrifying, he admitted. Something that might be the first completely honest thing I've done in years. But here's the question neither of them could answer yet. Can you really rebuild something that was broken decades ago? Can two people from such different worlds create something real? Or were they just two lonely souls clinging to a memory of childhood innocence that could never exist in the complicated reality of adult life? Only time would tell. And time, as they both knew too well, had a way of revealing truths we're not ready to face. 6 months after that kiss, Silas Carmichael stood before the Chicago City Council with Aaliyah Monroe by his side, and for the first time in his adult life, he understood what it meant to build something that actually mattered. The council chambers were packed. City officials in their usual suits, community leaders from neighborhoods that rarely got a seat at tables like this, educators who'd spent careers fighting for scraps while watching resources flow everywhere except where they were needed most. The presentation on the screen behind them read, "The Carmichael Monroe Foundation for Educational Excellence." Both their names. Equal billing. Equal partnership. Not a charity case. Not a redemption project. A recognition that the best ideas come from people who've lived the problems you're trying to solve. But before Silas launched into the comprehensive plan they'd spent months developing, the technology grants, the teacher training programs, the community partnerships, he'd insisted on adding one element that Aaliyah hadn't known about until this morning. One addition that had made her cry in the car on the way over. "Before my partner presents the core initiative," Silas began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned that true power isn't about dominating a room but about lifting others up. "I want to address something that most education reform conversations conveniently ignore. We talk about struggling students, about achievement gaps, about failing schools. But we rarely talk about the families behind those statistics. The parents who have to choose between paying for medicine and paying for school supplies. The students who become caregivers when illness strikes. The bright, passionate educators who lose everything because one medical emergency can destroy a life faster than any academic degree can build one." He clicked to the next slide. "The Carmichael Monroe Foundation will include a comprehensive scholarship and support fund for students and families facing medical crises. No child should have to choose between caring for a sick parent and pursuing their education. No teacher should lose their career because the healthcare system failed their family. This fund will provide direct financial assistance, academic support, and wraparound services to ensure that medical tragedy doesn't also become educational catastrophe." The room was silent. Aaliyah reached over and squeezed his hand under the table, a gesture invisible to everyone else but felt in every atom of his being. "My partner, Aaliyah Monroe," he continued, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable, "taught me the most important lesson I'd forgotten somewhere between building an empire and losing my soul. Success without compassion is just accumulation. True wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned. And the mark of a society isn't how it treats those at the top, but how it cares for those one tragedy away from the bottom." When Aaliyah took over the presentation, speaking with the passion and precision of someone who'd lived every statistic she cited, Silas watched the room lean forward. These weren't abstract numbers to her. They were her former students, her neighbors, her mother, herself. And that authenticity, that hard-earned wisdom, was worth more than every consultant's report his company had ever commissioned. After the presentation, after the standing ovation, after the council members had committed funding and support that would change thousands of lives, Silas and Aaliyah walked through the streets of Englewood, the same neighborhood where they'd met as children, the same blocks where they'd dreamed impossible dreams on concrete steps and sealed promises with pinky fingers. Some things had changed: new businesses, fresh paint on old buildings, signs of slow but genuine renewal. Some things remained heartbreakingly the same: the poverty, the struggle, the sense that some neighborhoods mattered less in the city's calculations than others. Aaliyah stopped at the corner where their old apartment building used to stand. It had been torn down years ago, replaced by a small community garden that local residents had built from determination and donated seeds. She smiled at the sight of it. Something growing where something else had fallen. Metaphor made manifest. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she asked, her hand warm in his. "What's that?" "That morning outside your building. How different things would be if you just kept walking. If you'd never come looking for me at the shelter. If your mom had never mentioned my name. She turned to look at him. How many moments like that do we miss? How many chances at redemption or reconnection just slip past because we don't recognize them? Silas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. I think about it too. How I almost lost the most important person in my life because I'd forgotten the most basic principle of being human. That we're all one circumstance, one tragedy, one stroke of bad luck away from needing help. That treating anyone as less than human diminishes us both. That the line between the penthouse and the shelter is thinner than we want to believe, and compassion isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes any of this mean anything. You've changed, Aaliyah said softly, reaching up to touch his face. The sea I knew as a kid is back. But better, wiser, more intentional about the good he's trying to do. We both have. You're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. Building the dreams you had to put aside. Changing lives the way you always said you would. She smiled, and it was the same smile that had defended an awkward white kid on a playground decades ago. The same smile that had shared sweet potato pie and childhood secrets. And you're not just succeeding anymore, you're finally living. Making your success mean something beyond bank accounts and buildings with your name on them. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked almost too beautiful to be real, they stood together where they'd once sat as children, proving that some promises do survive time and distance and every reason they shouldn't. You know what's funny? Silas mused, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the sunset. What? I spent years building an empire, thinking that was the pinnacle of human achievement, the thing that would make my life matter. But the greatest thing I ever built was finding my way back to you, back to the part of myself I'd buried because I thought it made me weak. Aaliyah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder like it was made to fit there. And I spent years thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. My career, my home, my dignity, my hope. Turns out, sometimes you have to lose everything to find what's actually worth keeping. 1 year later, they married in a ceremony that perfectly captured who they'd become together. Silas's business associates in expensive suits sitting beside Aaliyah's former colleagues from the shelter, his family from Connecticut mixing seamlessly with her extended family from the South Side. The corporate world meeting the community in a celebration that proved different worlds could not just coexist but enrich each other. But the moment that meant the most came during the reception when a young woman approached them nervously, her eyes bright with a hope that could have been dangerous if it wasn't so carefully earned. Mrs. Carmichael? The name still sounded new, still made Aaliyah smile. You probably don't remember me, but you helped me with my homework at the State Street shelter last year. I just wanted to tell you, I got accepted to college. Northwestern. Full scholarship. Watch Aaliyah's face. Watch how her eyes filled with tears as she hugged this girl who represented everything she'd been fighting for. Everyone she'd refused to give up on even when the world had given up on her. I remember you, Aaliyah said, her voice thick with emotion. You were brilliant then and you're brilliant now. I'm so proud of you. As the girl walked away beaming, carrying dreams that would change her life and ripple out to change others, Silas wrapped his arms around his wife, understanding something profound that would have eluded the man he'd been 2 years ago. You know what this proves? He asked. What? That even in our darkest moments, when we think we have nothing left to give, we're still capable of changing lives. You were homeless and heartbroken and barely surviving, but you still took time to help that child with her homework. You still believed education mattered even when everything else had fallen apart. That's who you are, Aaliyah. That's who you've always been. Someone who gives light even when you're surrounded by darkness. She turned in his arms, kissing him softly, the kind of kiss that still held the wonder of something precious and almost lost. And you were so lost in your own success that you'd forgotten what kindness looked like. But the moment you recognized me, you changed course. You admitted you were wrong. You chose to be better instead of just defending who you'd become. That's who you are, see. Someone capable of growth. Someone brave enough to face your own worst self and decide to transform. The moral of their story wasn't a simple redemption arc or a rags to riches fairy tale with a neat bow on top. It was something deeper, more complex, more challenging. that we are all worthy of dignity regardless of our circumstances, that we're all capable of both falling and rising, that we're all connected by invisible threads of shared humanity that we ignore at our own peril. That success doesn't make you better than anyone else. It just gives you a greater responsibility to lift others up. That the people we dismiss in our worst moments might turn out to be the ones who save us in ways we never imagined. As they danced under string lights that turned the reception space into something magical, two childhood friends who'd found their way back to each other against impossible odds, Silas whispered in Aaliyah's ear, "Thank you for not giving up on the boy I used to be, for helping me find him again, for showing me that the best version of myself was the one I'd left behind." Aaliyah smiled, her eyes reflecting the lights and something deeper, a love that had survived decades and hardship and every logical reason it shouldn't exist. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, for remembering that promises made with pinky fingers when you're 8 years old are the most sacred ones of all, for proving that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be." And in that moment, surrounded by love and the community they were building together brick by brick, conversation by conversation, life changed by life changed, they both understood a truth that the world desperately needs to remember. The greatest fortune isn't found in bank accounts or buildings bearing your name or being featured in Forbes and Fortune. It's found in choosing compassion over comfort, connection over convenience, and love over everything else that pretends to matter but ultimately doesn't. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to find our way home. And sometimes home isn't a place you return to. It's a person who reminds you of who you really are beneath all the armor and achievement and carefully constructed images. Sometimes home is someone who knew you before the world told you who to be and loves you enough to call you back to that truth. Now here's what I need you to do. Look at your own life. Think about the people you've dismissed, the ones you've walked past without seeing, the connections you've let fade because they didn't fit the image you're trying to project. Think about who you were before the world taught you to value the wrong things. And ask yourself, what would it take to find your way back? What promise are you breaking by becoming someone your 8-year-old self wouldn't recognize? Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past and realized they were exactly what you needed? Or have you been that person someone walked away from? Share your story. Let's talk about the connections that changed us, the ones we lost, and the courage it takes to choose compassion when the world rewards indifference. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button because next week, we're diving into another tale about second chances, hard truths, and the transformation that happens when we finally stop running from who we used to be. Your move. What promise are you going to keep?